you became conscious based upon someone describing you in a way that was not the way that person perceived a black person should be. Um, how did you become that way? And how did you feel about the sources that molded you to that point then? Uh, I myself, to, an- to comment on the question myself, I was molded, of course, by my parents and my extended family, my friends at a very young age, but 3, 4, 5, 6. I was in a black neighborhood. Well, it was a mixed neighborhood to be fair. So we all associated together. And as I told you during our interview, when I guess was struck by the fact that MacArthur, my then close friend, was black, I asked my mother why, and she explained, as I mentioned to you, that that meant his ancestors came from somewhere different than we came from, and I took that to mean forever ancestors. I didn't analyze the question, and that was fine. That explained it to me. How did you feel about your image, yourself, relative to your parents when that person confronted you with that story?
Great question. Great question. So I'll tell you my initial feelings when I had that conversation was a very heavy and significant sadness for him because I could see the cascade of implications of what it meant for him to believe those things about himself, that part of his identity was that he needed to be in a gang. Part of his identity was that he needed to do poorly in school. Part of his identity was that he needed to curse, you know. Part of his identity was that he had to disrespect the teacher. You know, like these were things that somehow were programmed into him. And I found that to be incredibly sad. But like I said, I'm also very curious. I knew that, well, for me, and this has not changed since I was very young at that time, I never took on black as a part of my identity. I always understood blackness as something that was put on me. That's something I did not have a choice in, something that I was born into, not something that was a part of me. And so that's why I felt sad at hearing him say that. And so, how did I feel about my parents and whatnot, who had kind of, I would say my parents as well. They never, like, you know, people talk about having the talk with your black kids, right? The talk about what it means to be black in America. My parents never had that talk with me. So I never really talked to my parents about being black. And I think part of that is because my parents also didn't really, even though they understood themselves to be perceived as being black, I don't think that they really took on blackness as an identity either. And so it wasn't passed on to me in that way. I was more educating myself about race and blackness and whiteness as something that was separate from identity. And that has never changed for me. So I think that I wasn't really, I didn't really have any kind of feelings towards my parents or anything from that moment on, you know. But what it made me realize is that it's very likely, from that moment I understood, it's very likely that a lot of people has a false conception of race. And that conception of race can have substantial impacts on people's behavior, on people's thoughts, and on their actions, and thus on their outcomes. And later I understood on their environments. And so I just started kind of becoming more and more curious about that and wanting to investigate all of that. And that is a rabbit hole that is infinitely deep. So that's why I've been able to do it for decades now.
It's interesting because as you said that, you prompted me to think about how I perceived or didn't perceive all of this going through my youth years and through my teens, and I don't recall thinking about it at all. As I said, we were in a mixed environment, a suburb of Newark. You couldn't tell the difference. Um, East Orange, New Jersey. And we all played baseball and basketball together and hung out together in between frays, pitched quarters together while we were waiting closest to the line. We shot in the same pool halls. And probably I probably lacked the curiosity you described, because I probably was so immature as a young man and so self-absorbed that I didn't question much of the environment I was in. I lived it. That's pretty much it. I just lived it. And went on about my way with absolutely no expectations about anything at all. Maybe if I had any expectation, it would have been that I would marry someone and continue the cycle in the family, in the neighborhood. And that would be about as far as my imagination took me in those days. It was not, if I had any imagination, it was more towards baseball cards. It was more towards movies, cowboy and Indian movies, war movies, and that had a lot of impact on me as a child, and in fitting into, I think, what my um, friends and family felt. It was all consistent. I had no reason to question anything. I got a little bit older, of course, then I learned I was supposed to feel that Black people were inferior to white people. That came into my consciousness. You
So
and I
yeah,
talked
talk a little
about it.
bit about how that happened.
Well, just street, on Halloween. Part of the trick of Halloween was to get home past the black guys without them taking your candy bag, that kind of stuff. Just street prejudicial kinds of things, which, due to peer pressure, I played into to some degree, but never heartily felt. And in time, when I got older, even in my teens, all of that dissipated. I would rather ignore all of that than participate in all of that. And I didn't have to participate. I was clever enough to skirt all of that. Even when we were 16 and 17 and went down to Newark on Broome Street to the Ukrainian club, where they'd serve us a beer, and they knew darn well I wasn't 21 years old, as you had to be in those days. I would skirt the drinking situation by nursing one beer for the whole night because I could never stand it. Um, I had clever ways of having other bigger, stronger friends defend me. People favor me, and I seemed to play those as a kid. But my maturity level was terrible. I was a jerk in plain language. It took me a little longer to grow up, and when I did, I clicked, and life became very simple for me, with none of the complexities of race. Well, I was white, so I didn't have to confront that. I had to confront many other adversities. When I lived in Germany in the 60s, I had to confront some prejudice there by Germans against me as an American, that they were resentful. I had to deal with that and some other issues. I've had a few in my life. I've been fired more times than Carter's got liver pills. Um, I had to fight for my belief in what was right in those kinds of situations, and I won some, lost some, won some. But overall, on balance, luckily I had picked a career, basically sales, business development, that I was suited for, that I enjoyed, and that I could pursue with great vigor, as John F. Kennedy would say. Overall, I did well. and had a great time, a lot of great experiences, and then I retired 2006. So now I have a lot of time to think and read. I love reading history of all kinds. It seems to be the underpinning of it all, but economics is all of that. Um, I've delved into a bit of sociology and all of that. I'm not any kind of real um, conversationalist on it, but I guess I've always read a lot because I always wanted to be aware. I wanted to hear something and be able to say, "Oh, okay, I'm aware of that. I may need more detail. I'll go get it. I may just drop it." But I always wanted to be aware, and that reminds me of why I picked Islam back in 2001. Is when George Bush said it was Al Qaeda. Me thinking I'm so smart and knowledgeable, didn't know what an Al Qaeda was, and how could I be so ignorant of that fact? And that embarrassed me to myself. I was the only one living with that, so that's when I went into my Islamic studies. Um, I had great parents. They did not try to tell me how to be, what to be in any way, shape, or form. They worried about me because they thought I was not going to amount to too much. They loved me dearly. My Uncle Freddie taught me to be the best I could be. I tried. Um, and while my IQ is probably average, uh, my judgment is better than average. I know that for lots of reasons. And so I have my own view. I have my own view as an American. I have my own view of, I wish every person could just be an American. I think everyone who spends time being something else in America creates a situation where they now have to deal with something I don't have to deal with. And I'm not here to teach them or lecture them or worry about it. I honestly, it's none of my business. Everybody has a right to be what they want to be. I think my guiding principle is that the most important thing in America is justice. And justice is everyone having the opportunity to be that they're the best that their wits and motivation uh, can take them, with no one else stopping them. Certainly not the government. And the government structurally uh, went as far as I think it could to the letter of the law to institute in the law that um, discrimination, race, color, creed. They missed sexual orientation at the time. Sex back then in '64 meant male, female. But they fixed that in 2018 with Bostock versus Clayton County. I think the wrong way. I think Congress should have done it, but that's a different argument. Um, so because America has a maybe not a perfect, but a very strong structure to try and end prejudice and discrimination, even at the extent of taking away from each of us our freedom of association. That's a little bit at risk, but it's a price worth paying if we manage ourselves well. And part of what is important in America, that always has been, is each American governing himself, not looking to the law, but governing himself in the spirit of what we need to keep such a complex, risky thing as market freedom, individual freedom, all of that going. And it's a real hard thing. I think we're going to lose it. I think it's just maybe it's time to be lost. The world has become, because of the internet, in so many ways, I guess, challenging in terms of what we hear and how it influences us.
Thanks for watching. For access to the full-length conversation and all of the 2-hour-long unedited conversations that I've had on race, click the support link in the description below. Thanks for your support and see you next time.